We're just on the south side of East Bay in the Bredor Lakes at Irish Cove. This area was once an area of quarrying for limestone. Some of the bedrock in the area, however, is, as you can see in the shore down below, is very irregular in the foreshoe group of tuffs and other very resistant rocks that are exposed along the shore. But back in behind the road, you'll find there's some quarrying of limestone for the Scotia Limestone Limited. The shoreline along this section is intermittent bedrock outcrop and pebble fringing beach. Just past this river, we're getting into sort of destabilized cliffs. They're vegetated, but it's slipping down slope somewhat. It's 11:23. This part of the shore has partially vegetated and partially stabilized cliffs, unconsolidated cliffs over bedrock. There's a fringing beach, pebble and sand, and then there's an increasing width to the shallow water area as marked by the light color on your video. We're getting into more increasing bedrock, and the wind is increasing, and so is our turbulence. You can see the waves starting to pick up around this cape. Bedrock and pocket beaches, gravel, pebble. The relief here is in the order of probably 60 meters to the road, and what you're seeing there right now is probably a closer to 30 meters or 20 meters right at the water level. Coming up on the Johnstown, get into more of a continuous beach with stabilized cliffs in the back shore. Coming up at the, you see the church coming up in the view of the Johnstown Harbor, where they have a boat, a catamaran, where you can take it out into the Bredor Lakes on a different day trip. Difficulty they have at Johnstown is that there's two recurve spits going into the harbor where the boat is, and because the sediment's congesting that entranceway, they're trying to find means of stopping the sediment transfer from coming along. And as you can see along here, the source of the sediment are these erosional cliffs, which are partially stabilized. There's also business development there. And here we get a better view at 500 feet of the overall coastline with the recurve spits and the headlands. And that was from about 500 feet. And we'll continue on now past Johnstown and the Bearish was. Going towards Campbell Cove. There's several small barrier spits fronting these coves. It's a very shallow entrance. Some of them have submarine bars in front. This particular embayment's not named, but you can see that there's a better spit development on the east side, and the west side has been sort of stopped from growing by the seawall that's preventing erosion of the cliff. There's a lighthouse there. It looks like it's now a residence. And then along this shore is a low erosional cliff, and sediment again going to the west, and a low flanking spit that's not vegetated, almost closing off this unnamed embayment. And you're back into partially stabilized erosional cliff with a narrow fringing beach. Coming around into Campbell Cove, it's destabilized cliff, the brownish till material. The beach is pebble, cobble, and then there's a nearshore shallow zone of nearshore rocks and cobbles. The sandy beach at the head of the bay. Some destabilized cliffs, unconsolidated material. Time is 11:28. We're heading towards Johnstown Harbor. Getting a good view of the small bays that you find all along this section. There's several small channels in between the islands and peninsulas. The main part of the land is approximately 10 to 15 meters high, unconsolidated material, and the beaches themselves are mostly heterogeneous sand and cobble boulder. Going down into Johnstown Harbor, there's a road that runs alongside of the shore. There's several residences along here where the backshore is groomed, and they have wharves extending out offshore. Shores as we get to the head of the bay are not really more, not lower. There's a sort of a moderate slope going up to the road, but the beach itself is almost non-existent. It's sort of a vegetated material, wetland and low marsh. As we circle at the head of Johnstown Harbor and then head back out, you may get a view of the whole harbor. There you've got a view looking down Johnstown Harbor. There's a bit of wetland and shallow water at the head of the bay, a very small spit with dune grass on it, just on the far side. We're going to go back out to the same way we came into Johnstown Harbor. These shores are partially vegetated. There's some dune grass that's a little more sandy in the inner shores. And there's several small crest-baked forelands or spits extending off many of the ends of the islands. Several coves in the area. The wind is starting to pick up a little bit out of the south. Just cutting across the entrance to Johnstown Harbor, another one of these spits that's enclosed a small pond. And we're going around Wilson Island. The outer part of the island is primarily low cliff, poorly stabilized, probably in the order of 10 to 20 meters in height. See a lot of slumping and dead trees falling down the cliffs. The beach itself is a mixture of sand, pebble, cobble, and then in the near shore it's very shallow and it's cobble boulder material. Cutting across Bearishwa Harbor. It has an opening on both sides of the island. You'll be picking up the barrier in just a second. Again, it's sand and pebble. There's a view looking down Bearishwa Harbor right now. We're just going to go over to the island that anchors these two barriers. And then head back in. You get a view from the backside of Bearishwa Barrier. You can see there's a submerged shoal that goes across between the island and the barrier. And as we come into Bearishwa Harbor, there's the beaches are more continuous, sandy, fine pebble than they were in the other harbor, but the head of Bearishwa Harbor, again more like the other one, very little beach development and more sort of stagnant water. In Hay Cove, we're seeing several nets going across the head of this harbor, right perpendicular to shore, and here's the floodplain of the Tom River, extensive wetland. See some flood plain deposits. We're back into the sort of the Windsor rocks now, the carboniferous rocks, limestones, and the gypsums and so on. As we circle, we get a good view of the channel that leads out from the river and the flood tile deposits. Time is 11:35. And we're just in the inner part of Bearishwa Harbor. We're flying at 300 feet and about 70 knots. Here you get a good view of the shoal or the shallow water areas that extend off several of these islands. In the middle of Bearishwa Harbor, there's actually quite a large shoal. Very shallow, looks like pebble material. Just picked it up on the picture there now. It's June 25th, 1996. And as we come to the outer part of Bearishwa Harbor, we'll be traveling over the submerged barrier that once probably extended out to the island. The map that I have shows it as submerged, so it may not have been a complete barrier. just gone by the small barrier that fronts that pond. On Evans Island, actually. Now we're looking at another small barrier with a seasonal opening through the pebble material. Look at high water, it looks like it would probably be open as well. Then coming around Evan Island, the time is 11:37. Another flanking spit extends, the part that you see is only part of it. It actually extends quite a ways under the water. You just see the shoal in the foreground now as it extends offshore and protects the inner shores along Evans Island. They'll move in along Evans Island towards Bar Point and McNabb's Cove. A lot of these shores, they remind me of the Drummonoid coast. A lot of them have unconsolidated material on the surface. The cliffs are about 10 meters high, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less, unconsolidated hills. And in between the headlands are a series of small barriers. Just entering into McNabb's Cove. Cliff is about 12 meters and unstabilized, and then we have a small barrier in front of the pond with stagnant water, only seasonal opening. And as we go back into McNabb's Cove, it widens out a bit, and there's a treed barrier at the inner end of Evans Island. Come around McNabb's Cove, the inner harbor. There's a few residences at the end. Most of the shore is a sandy pebble material. Most of the shore along here is a fringy sand pebble cobble. A lot of dead tree debris. And then right at the head we're starting to pick up wetland at the road that comes along. It's actually Highway 4. Leads on down to St. Peter's. We'll make a circle over the highway. Time at the highway is 11:40. There you get a view looking down McNabb's Cove, wetland and flood tidal deposit, or fluvial deposits at the head of the cove, and then we just gained a view of them now. And then there's several islands, two large ones and one small one, with sort of very narrow beach fringing them, except for at the tips where you've got almost a connecting spit connecting two of the islands. Just as we come out of McNabb's Cove, there's appears to be some nets just in the far cove. Don't know if it's for herring spawning or what it's for, but there's a couple of them just in the corner. Back onto the outer coast, we'll be heading down into Soldier's Cove. It's June 25th, 1996, and we're flying about 300 feet and 70 knots. Small barrier fronting the pond, and then we get back right into these unconsolidated cliffs Looks like there's probably bedrock near the base or within these cliffs. They're very poorly stabilized. It's probably because we're in these carboniferous rocks and there's a lot of fines in the soils and so on. At Deader Creek, there's a small harbor. And then as we go into Soldier's Cove, we're starting to pick up bedrock outcrop again. There's sort of a ramping shore, ramping rock shore, fairly smooth, but fractured look, and offshore is bedrock as well. The back shore is unconsolidated material over the bedrock. There's another ramp rock just before that pond. There's several small ponds that are fronted by little barriers. And then we switch right back into a partially stabilized cliff with the pebble cobble fringing beach. .43, just heading into Soldier's Cove now. Back shore, small scarp cliff, less than 3 meters high. A storm berm of a ridge of pebble cobble material, and some sand in the lower foreshore, and more sand in the near shore. Come around the corner at the head of Soldier's Cove, and we'll get a view in a minute of the bridge that cuts across the head of it, and there's a small opening underneath it into the head of the cove. Going around onto the other shore of Soldier's Cove, we've got a building. There's several buoys just offshore. It could be for lobster because there's a fair bit of coarse material along this shore. And going by Soldier's Cove West, and then we'll be going off onto Alec Island, Indian Island, and Chapel Island, and we're now into the Chapel Indian Reserve. And in the background, you may just pick up the mission where the Aboriginal people gather in the summer each year for a traditional gathering at the church there. Along these outer islands, Indian Island, we've got the flanking spit coming off of them. This sort of Drumlinoid topography again. We've got partially stabilized cliffs. Along the outer shores, and then on the inner part, there's a spit flanking off of it. Going out to the far island that doesn't have a name on my map, but it's just beyond Chapel Island. And again, it's got this flanking spit off of it. There's again that white material in the near shore. It's probably bedrock, I would guess. It may be gypsum. And then there's a net just off of that island that extends offshore. And there's quite a rocky, bouldery shoal that extends seaward of these islands, and it's quite bouldery, probably between the two islands, and there's a shoal that extends along it. Coming around outer Chapel Island. come around off on the Chapel Island. We're getting closer to the mission area. We're coming up to the end of Chapel Island where the Aboriginal people meet each year. You'll see the mission church and the cottages there. It's a very pretty setting on this island. There's several residences. This is the Chapel Island Indian Reserve. Access to Chapel Island is by boat, and you can see the launching areas on both the island and the mainland. As we swing around to Indian Point on the mainland shore, you can see the fringing beach increasing, although still fairly narrow, backed by a partially stabilized erosional scarp and trees right down to the back beach, and then a small cove with a little barrier and a small inlet into that lagoon. As we go by the Indian Point and the area of the main shore, sort of St. Peter's Inlet, we get back into the partially stabilized cliff, treed right down almost to the high tide or the high water level, and then you've got a fairly narrow fringing beach of pebble cobble material. We're just going to swing inland for a few minutes to come across the Chapel Indian Reserve and get a view of the settlement there. There's some, looks like strip logging this part of the hill. Some of the new residences that are being built on the street just across from us as you head across to Highway number 4, and we'll just circle around Highway 4 and the large lake, this Indian Lake just by the road. Around that lake, just follow right around the lake. We're traveling at about 500 feet at 80 knots. The time is 11:50, and we're just looking at highway number 4 at the Chapel Indian Reserve. And we'll just circle around and return back to the St. Peter's Inlet. There's a good view of the lake and the town. Just on the side of the lake looks like a settling pond, but I can't comment on what it's used for. The lake itself has some fairly shallow, muddy areas, a lot of gitche in it at the one end. And we're just returning to Robertson's Cove at 11:51. And heading along shore towards St. Peter's. Coming down towards the Salmon Creek, we're just going to buy that. Pretty much the same fringy shore, pebble cobble. Actually, yeah, pebble cobble. The near shore area has a bit more sand in it, but there's also a lag cobble as well. The back shore is a fairly stabilized, unconsolidated sediment, just treed right down to the edge of the water almost, and then you've got a fringy beach. The near shore area, which you may not be able to pick up as well, is fairly shallow. There's a lot of shoals on the tips or the headlands. There's more cobble boulder material.